Ellen DeGeneres was in the middle of her opening monologue when she noticed something extraordinary happening in the third row. A 10-year-old girl with braided hair and the most serious expression Ellen had ever seen on a child was moving her hands in fluid, graceful gestures, translating every word Ellen spoke for the two adults sitting beside her. It wasn't unusual for Ellen to see sign language interpreters in her audience, but this wasn't a professional translator. This was a child, no older than 10, serving as the bridge between her deaf parents and the hearing world with a maturity that stopped Ellen mid-sentence. What Ellen didn't know was that she was witnessing something that happened dozens of times every day in the Rodriguez household. 10-year-old Isabella serving as her parents' voice, their ears, their connection to a world that wasn't built for them. But what was about to unfold on Ellen's stage would prove that love doesn't need words when hearts understand each other perfectly. The moment that would change everything began with Ellen's natural curiosity and her inability to ignore a child who was clearly carrying responsibilities far beyond her years. It was a Tuesday afternoon taping in Burbank, and the Ellen Show was firing on all cylinders. The energy was electric, the celebrity guest had been charming, and Ellen was doing what she did best, making people feel seen and valued. The studio buzzed with its usual pre-show excitement, camera operators gliding smoothly across the polished floor, audience members sharing their anticipation with neighbors they'd just met. But as she moved through her usual audience interaction segment, her eyes kept returning to the little girl in the third row, whose hands never stopped moving. Isabella Rodriguez had been translating for her parents, Maria and Carlos, since she was 5 years old. It started with simple things, telling them when someone was knocking on the door, explaining what the grocery store clerk was asking. But as Isabella grew older and more fluent in both English and American Sign Language, she became their primary interpreter for everything from parent-teacher conferences to medical appointments. The journey to master both languages hadn't been easy. While other children her age were learning to ride bikes and play video games, Isabella was studying facial expressions, hand positions, and the subtle nuances that separate casual conversation from formal interpretation. She'd watch herself in mirrors, perfecting her clarity, making sure every gesture was precise enough that her parents never missed a detail of the world around them. The Ellen Show tickets had been Isabella's idea. She'd entered a contest online, writing an essay about her family that began with the words, "My parents can't hear music, but they dance to the vibrations of love." The essay had moved the show's producers to tears, and before Isabella knew it, she had 3 tickets to a taping. "This is for you, Misha," Carlos had signed to his daughter when she told them about winning the tickets. "You always take care of us. Today we just want to watch you enjoy something." But Isabella couldn't enjoy anything without making sure her parents were included. It wasn't obligation, it was love in its purest form, the kind of love that makes inclusion automatic, seamless, and joyful. She had spent the entire car ride to the studio explaining the layout, describing what Ellen looked like, preparing them for every detail so they could experience the show as fully as any hearing audience member. As Ellen continued her monologue, she found herself performing not just for the audience, but specifically for this remarkable child who was ensuring her parents didn't miss a single joke, a single moment of connection. There was something about Isabella's dedication, her grace under pressure, that reminded Ellen of every child who had ever grown up faster than they should have, because their family needed them to. During the first commercial break, Ellen made her way over to Isabella's row. She'd learned to trust her instincts about people, and something told her this little girl had a story worth sharing. "Hi there," Ellen said, kneeling beside Isabella's seat. "I'm Ellen." Isabella's eyes went wide with excitement, but her first instinct wasn't to respond to Ellen, it was to sign to her parents, telling them that Ellen DeGeneres was talking to her. Maria and Carlos's faces lit up with pride and excitement as they watched their daughter interact with her hero. "I'm Isabella," the little girl said, her voice clear and confident despite her obvious nervousness. "And these are my parents, Maria and Carlos Rodriguez." Ellen waved to Maria and Carlos, who waved back enthusiastically. She noticed how Isabel automatically positioned herself so that her parents could see both Ellen and Isabella's hands, ensuring they wouldn't miss any part of this interaction. "Isabella, I've been watching you translate for your parents, and I have to say I'm amazed. How long have you been doing this?" Isabella thought for a moment, signing Ellen's question to her parents as she considered her answer. "Since I was little, I guess. My parents are deaf, so I help them talk to people who don't know sign language." Ellen noticed how matter-of-factly Isabella said this, as if being a 10-year-old interpreter was the most natural thing in the world. "That's a big responsibility for someone your age." Isabella shrugged, but there was wisdom in her eyes that spoke to years of navigating between two worlds. It's not that big. They take care of me in every other way. This is just how I take care of them. The simplicity of that statement hit Ellen like a gentle earthquake. This child had distilled the essence of family love into one perfect sentence. Isabella, would you and your parents like to come up on stage so I can meet them properly? Isabella's face broke into the biggest smile Ellen had seen all day. She turned to her parents, her hands moving rapidly as she signed Ellen's invitation. Maria and Carlos's expressions shifted from surprise to joy to something approaching tears as they realized they were being invited to participate, not just observe. As the family made their way to the stage, Ellen noticed how naturally Isabella positioned herself between her parents and the audience, ready to facilitate whatever conversation was about to happen. But she also noticed how Maria and Carlos kept their hands on their daughter's shoulders, grounding her, reminding her that while she might be their voice, they were her foundation. Once they were seated on stage, Ellen addressed Isabella but made sure to maintain eye contact with Maria and Carlos as well, understanding instinctively that this conversation was with all three of them. Isabella, can you tell me what it's like being your parents' interpreter? Isabella considered the question seriously, then began to speak while simultaneously signing her words for her parents. It's like being a bridge, she said. My parents live in a world that's all about what you can see and feel and touch. Other people live in a world that's all about what you can hear. I get to live in both worlds, and I get to help them connect. Ellen was struck by the poetry in Isabella's words, but even more by the lack of any resentment or burden in her voice. This child genuinely saw her role as a gift, not a responsibility. Is it ever hard? Ellen asked gently. Isabella glanced at her parents, then back at Ellen. Sometimes, like when kids at school don't understand why my parents don't talk the same way, or when people look at them like they're different. But you know what? They're not different. They're just quiet on the outside and really loud on the inside. Ellen felt tears pricking her eyes. What do you mean, loud on the inside? Isabella's face lit up as she prepared to answer what was clearly one of her favorite topics. My dad tells the funniest jokes, but he tells them with his hands. My mom sings lullabies, but she sings them with her fingers on my arms. They argue sometimes, but their arguments look like dancing. They love each other so loud that you can see it from across the room. Ellen turned to Maria and Carlos, who had been watching their daughter with expressions of pure pride and love. Can I ask them something through you? Isabella nodded eagerly. Ask them what they want people to know about raising a hearing child when you're deaf. Isabella's hands moved in fluid, graceful gestures as she translated Ellen's question. Maria and Carlos looked at each other, then began signing their response. Isabella watched intently, then turned back to Ellen. They say that people always ask if it's hard to raise a hearing child when you're deaf, but they want people to know that the opposite is true. I taught them about the hearing world, but they taught me about the seeing world. They taught me that you can hear someone's mood in their posture, that you can hear love in the way someone looks at you, that you can hear laughter in someone's shoulders shaking. Ellen was openly crying now, but she wasn't finished. She had one more question, one that she sensed might unlock something important. Isabella, what do you want to be when you grow up? Isabella's response was immediate and certain, a sign language interpreter. But not just any interpreter. I want to be an interpreter who helps deaf parents at their kids' school plays and graduations and all the important moments, because every parent should get to understand when their kid is being amazing. The audience erupted in applause, but Ellen noticed that Maria and Carlos were signing something to Isabella. Isabella listened with her eyes, then broke into a huge grin. What did they say? Ellen asked. They said they're proud of me, but they want me to know that I don't have to take care of people my whole life. I can be anything I want to be. Ellen stood up and addressed the camera directly. Ladies and gentlemen, this family is showing us something beautiful. They're showing us that disability doesn't mean inability, that love finds a way to communicate across any barrier, and that sometimes the most extraordinary families are the ones that look different from the outside but are absolutely perfect on the inside. Ellen turned back to the Rodriguez family. I have something for you, all three of you. From backstage, Ellen's team brought out a large wrapped box. As Isabella helped her parents unwrap it, they discovered something that made all three of them gasp. It was a video communication system with high-definition cameras and screens, designed to help deaf families stay connected with their extended family and community. This is so you can video chat with family members who live far away, Ellen explained as Isabella translated. But that's not all. Ellen reached into her jacket and pulled out an envelope. Isabella, you talked about wanting to be a sign language interpreter. Well, the Ellen DeGeneres Foundation wants to set up a college fund for you, specifically for studying deaf education and interpretation. Isabella stared at the envelope, then at Ellen, then at her parents. Maria and Carlos were crying now, their hands moving rapidly as they signed their gratitude and amazement. But Ellen had one more surprise. And for your parents, we're arranging for them to visit the Gallaudet University campus in Washington, D.C., the world's premier university for deaf and hard-of-hearing students, because their wisdom and love deserve to be shared with other deaf parents. The family embraced each other in a group hug that spoke louder than any words could. But the moment that would define this entire experience came when Carlos separated from the hug and began signing something directly to Ellen. Isabella watched her father's hands, then turned to Ellen with tears in her eyes. He says that for 10 years he's been worried that being deaf made him a bad father because he couldn't hear me cry as a baby, or hear me call for help, or hear me laugh. But today, seeing how you look at our family, he realizes that he's not a bad father. He's just a different kind of father, and different isn't wrong. Ellen walked over to Carlos and, with Isabella translating, said directly to him, "You're not just a good father. You're an extraordinary father. You raised a daughter who sees the world through everyone's eyes, who understands that communication is about connection, not just words. That's not different. That's exceptional." As the show continued, something magical happened. Isabella began teaching the audience basic sign language, showing them how to sign "I love you," "thank you," and "friend." The camera caught audience members practicing the signs, reaching across aisles to sign to each other, creating a moment of universal communication that transcended spoken language. After the cameras stopped rolling, Ellen spent several minutes learning basic signs from Isabella and her parents. She wanted to be able to greet them in their language the next time she saw them, because she was certain this wouldn't be the last time their paths crossed. 6 months later, the Rodriguez family returned to Ellen's show, but this time they brought something special, a short documentary Isabella had created for her middle school about deaf culture and the beauty of sign language. The documentary had won a national student film competition and was being used in schools across the country to teach hearing students about deaf culture. The best part, Isabella told Ellen during their return visit, is that now when kids meet my parents, they don't see them as different. They see them as interesting. They want to learn sign language. They want to understand. Ellen had learned basic sign language in the months since their first meeting, and she was able to conduct part of the interview directly with Maria and Carlos, with Isabella serving as backup translator when needed. The moment when Ellen signed "Thank you for teaching me about love without words" directly to Maria and Carlos was one of the most beautiful moments in the show's history. Today, Isabella Rodriguez is in high school, still interpreting for her parents but also teaching sign language to her classmates and volunteering at the local deaf community center. She's already been accepted to Gallaudet University's early admission program, with plans to become a certified interpreter and advocate for deaf families. Maria and Carlos Rodriguez have become local celebrities in their community, speaking at schools and community centers about deaf culture and parenting. They always end their presentations the same way, by having the audience watch Isabella translate a story they tell about the day their daughter taught Ellen DeGeneres and millions of viewers that families don't have to sound the same to love the same. The lesson the Rodriguez family taught everyone that day was profound in its simplicity. Love doesn't need words when hearts understand each other perfectly. Communication is about connection, not just conversation. And sometimes the most extraordinary families are the ones that find their own ways to speak, to hear, and to understand each other. Isabella's translation of her father's final message to Ellen became one of the most quoted moments in the show's history. "You can't hear our voices, but you can see our hearts, and our hearts are very, very loud with love." That's not just television. That's proof that the most beautiful conversations happen not with our mouths and ears, but with our hands and hearts and the spaces between us that love fills without making a sound. Because when a 10-year-old girl can teach the world that silence is just another language for love, that's not interpretation. That's transformation.